Jeremy, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I've been really excited to chat to you. I feel like I've been sort of a fan of Orbit Fab since day one, pretty much. Let's start with the basics. Where did the name Orbit Fab come from? Can I infer it means
Yeah.
Orbit Fabulous, or is that literally not what it
Well,
means?
some people think it's Orbit Faber, for our CEO's last name. It's for Orbit Fabrications. The name actually came from Daniel and I's first company. We started Space Fab, and we were looking at growing semiconductor ingots in orbit using indium phosphide. And after 3 months, we found that this wasn't a really good fit or a market that was accessible to us. And so we made a pivot. But we liked the name. People were starting to know it's a space fab already, but we kind of wanted to do a little bit of a rebranding. So we did Orbit Fab.
Nice. So you worked with your co-founder Daniel before founding Orbit Fab.
Yeah, so I knew Daniel back from when he was at Deep Space Industries. I ended up getting a contract there when I was a senior in undergrad, and ended up working a little bit with him. We reconnected at a conference later in 2017 after I graduated and started sharing our vision for the future of, having permanent settlements, permanent jobs in space. He invited me out to California, and I was crazy enough to book a one-way flight. Got home from that conference and told my parents I was moving out in 2 weeks, and started working on four or five different business models together for the rest of 2017. And by December, we knew that Orbit Fab was the one we wanted to pursue, and so we started that one in January of 2018.
That's incredible. Which conference did you meet at? Because part of I always say to people about sort of industry conferences, it's not just about the plenary addresses. It's about the networking and the people that you'd meet. So which conference was it at?
Yeah, so we met at the ISDC conference that was at St. Louis at the time. A lot of great conferences for younger people to go to and network. You have like New Space is a really good one. Um, Space Frontier Foundation puts that one on. You have New Worlds. You have the Symposium Satellite. Also, like for the people listening, like go check out Space Generation Advisory Council. They put on the SGC, which is a part of their international get together. And then they have the Space Generation Fusion Forum, SGFF. That's at Colorado Springs for the Space Symposium. That's also really good for young people to network with each other.
That's so cool. So you said you had a number of potential business ideas when you and Daniel met. Um, what was it about the idea of gas stations in space? Or maybe we should say what Orbit Fab actually is first. So it's that's kind of as I think it's gas stations
Yeah.
in space, which is
So
really easy to get your head around, which is great.
yeah, so like our intro to Orbit Fab, we always tell people gas stations in space were the unlimited propellant supply chain in orbit. Next stage, we want to really long term, we want to be the full petrochemicals plant, so like mid downstream oil and gas company. Obviously not oil and gas, but using different chemicals in space. So buying lunar mined, asteroid mined material, converting that into usable propellants, usable commodities for commercial space stations, and things of that nature.
Does that mean uh, getting it in orbit and turning it into propellant in orbit?
Correct. That's long
Wow.
term, what we want to get to. Warehousing. So first step for satellite servicing, you have, on orbit refueling. This enables everything else to be more cost effective and profitable. Then you want to start swapping out your payloads, right?
Mm.
So take out old components, put in new components. And when you do that, it doesn't make sense to just launch one type of component. For every time you want to do an upgrade, you want to launch like 12 of them, pick a number, and then store them in a rack so that way people can just grab them and pick them. And it makes sense to do that near the depots so that way you can always top up on fuel as you're going between the warehouse and the customers.
Wow, that's super cool.
So that's more like near term than the on orbit petrochemicals company.
Got it. So
But
the
yeah,
the
we have much bigger visions than just gas stations in space.
oh, I wanna hear all about them. But the product you've got at the moment, and I must say it's remarkable that you've, first of all, got something to orbit in how many years is it?
So we first went to orbit within the first year of us founding the company.
That's unusual. Why do you think that was? Was it just that the the product was there at the right time? Did you have the network, or
No,
how did you manage to pull that off?
it was very intentional. In the space industry, unfortunately, if you don't have something in orbit, you're kind of viewed as a PowerPoint company. And so our goal was to have something in orbit within the first year of us founding to really kind of set the stage for our growth and show people that, no, we actually can get things done. So as we were going for our pre-seed round of funding in January of 2018, we also were talking with the ISS National Laboratory, formerly CASIS, about doing a on-orbit refueling or fluids transfer demo inside of the International Space Station. And so we actually got that contract and the funding like within a week of each other. And from that point, we had 4.5 months to turn our napkin sketch into a flight hardware handover for the Dragon resupply mission. So we ended up launching the first one on the in December of that year, and then the second one was a tank with 3 gallons of water, and that one has is considered a catastrophic level hazard by NASA because if water leaks and gets on an astronaut's face, they can actually drown.
Mm.
The surface tension's the strongest force, and you can't really push it away. And so that one, NASA threw the book at us, and we still predicted all of their requirements and met their all of their safety needs to get that up.
So why water? Is that because it's sort of similar to propellant, or do you think
Yeah,
providing would you ever provide water as well, or is it really just gas is your main focus?
no, so water is a satellite propellant. There are several satellites in orbit today that are using a water-based propellant system. Additionally, we're looking at providing water to commercial space stations in the future through the Rafty port as part of selling commodities. And so we figured this was another good way. And it was also the easiest thing we could test on the International Space Station.
Mm. So
Because
you
one
meant
of our other goals was to actually offload the water into the International Space Station to supply them with the water we brought up.
that's so cool. So you mentioned Rafty, so that's the rapidly attachable fluid transfer interface.
That is
Rafty's a great nickname. So what is that? Is that the connector? Is
that
that
is the
the
connector, yes. So
huh?
we have two sides of this interface. There's the Rafty, which is on the commercial side, very low swap C, really trying to make it accessible for everyone in the industry. And then we took all of the complexities needing to dock with it, transfer the fluid and everything like that, and we put it on our grip, which is on our fuel shuttles. And so our architecture right now is fuel depots, big simple tanks of fuel, and then fuel shuttles, which have the smarts to go from our depots, grab the fuel, and then deliver it to our customers.
Wow. And how adaptable is that to different types of satellites? Could older satellites be retrofitted so they can be connectable or no?
No, so we are not working on anything being retrofitted. When a satellite's up there, if they don't have Rafty, they can call a tow truck company or another servicing company to provide life extension, like the Northrop Grumman Mission Extension Vehicle or Astroscale's Lexi. Really, we're NASA's looking at trying to retrofit a legacy satellite with their Restore L mission, and it's costing hundreds of millions of dollars. It's very expensive. Whereas we're focusing on just put it on at the beginning, make it very cheap. We actually designed it so it could be the primary fill and drain valve on the ground, and then we can come and dock to it in space, so you don't have to add another piece to it. And that was
Mm.
kind of the whole thinking behind it. We really like brought the whole industry with us on this Rafty journey, if you will. Like we've talked with over 200 companies and government agencies globally, sharing our designs, getting feedback, getting requirements from everyone. I tell people like Rafty is not an Orbit Fab product. It's we're just the surrogate. This is the industry's refueling valve that they wanted, because we've just done so many customer interviews, collecting so
Mm.
much data to make sure that this is going to meet a global need, not just a US need, not just a UK need or EU need, European need.
Mm. So I guess it's like the sort of Apple connector, standardizing it so anyone
Correct.
can plug in and play. Huh.
Exactly.
So do you have any proprietary control of that? Do you own the any patents, or is it sort of an open source
So
kind of thing?
we have the patents for Rafty, but we have it under an open license. So we're trying to work with other companies like Beko, Ball, or other component manufacturers to really try to take this and manufacture it alongside us. Again, we don't want Rafty to us is a means to an end. We really want to focus on delivering like the best refueling service in orbit. Rafty is just like that first step that needs to get done in order for everyone to be compatible. So we're working with channel partners and things like that to really kind of proliferate this interface across the industry.
Wow, super disruptive. Well, I guess it's such a new industry, so it's kind of there is a race to be first to market, but equally the whole space economy is so vast. There's so much room for other players, and I guess from your side, you kind of want the competition as well because it's gonna like generate the market, and there'll be more clients for everyone. Um,
Yep.
that's
Yeah,
yeah.
we're a lot of servicing and everything are on the interfaces right now, but I'm really excited when we take that next step to actually have competing around like the service
Mm.
versus the interface.
So this might be a really stupid question, but how do you refuel the gas stations themselves? Because I assume you have to get the propellant off the ground. So do you have a launch provider? How are you doing it at the moment, or plan to do it?
Yeah, so the depots we launch them as fourth class mail. So if there's any extra room on a rocket, we'll kind of slot it in there. Eventually, we'll just be buying whole rockets and launching up tons and tons of fuel at once to kind of meet demand. For now, that unfortunately the depots are not refuelable themselves, just because if we're launching to refuel those depots, we might as well just launch a depot. This is why we're looking at the whole petrochemicals option in the future, so that we can actually produce the propellants in orbit and then refuel and reuse our depots. So for the time being, if our depots are in LEO, when we
Mm.
have a certain amount of fuel left, we'll actively deorbit them, so we're not space junk. And if we're in GEO, the depots are already left in the graveyard orbit.
Interesting. And I guess that's part of the sort of motivations or values behind Orbit Fab is the fact that by extending the life of satellites, by refueling them, you're minimizing space junk and you're getting more out of satellites once they're in space.
So that's partly it. A lot of people look at refueling as life extension, but it's really important that we shift the perspective of how we look at refueling. You don't refuel your car because you want it to last longer. That's not your mentality. You're
Mm.
refueling your car because you need to go do more things. You need to go somewhere. If you're doing a cargo ship or a cargo plane, it's the same thing. It's like refueling, yes, extends the life, but that's kind of the byproduct of needing to do more things. And if you look throughout history, every civilization and economy grows when there's new access to cheaper energy. So, first we had horses and carriages. We couldn't really get that many goods and services from one place to another. Then we had steam, then we had coal, and now we're like oil and gas, and that, really ignited the global economy because we had this super cheap energy source that allowed us to move goods and services and people very cheaply and very efficiently. And if you look at the space industry, we've had a space economy, but it was all for terrestrial use for the longest time, which was essentially Earth observation and telecommunications, and that was basically it for 60
Mm.
years. Now we're looking at servicing on manufacturing, VLEO constellations, and all of this is great, but you're still in this single use paradigm that doesn't allow for growth because you have no flexibility with your assets, and you only get that flexibility to adapt to a new mission, to repurpose a vehicle, if you can refuel it.
Mm. And what's the main challenges of Orbit Fab? Is it a technical challenge or is it a sort of supply and demand challenge? And what are you? How's the company made up at the moment? Is it mainly sort of engineers at the moment, manufacturing?
Yeah, so the I'd say like the biggest challenge is just getting um, over this 0 to 1, where we're just working to get Rafty out there to everybody, and then now working on our shuttles. So I mean, it's annoying because it's just like the process in the sense that like you're trying to change the way a whole industry works, and it's not going to happen overnight, right? So it's just constantly educating, like constantly pushing out there, showing what we're doing, making sure that we're bringing the customers along so they feel comfortable with the service we're going to provide, and that's you can go fast, but unfortunately, like it's the will of the beast. We're just
Mm,
trying to turn the large ship that we're all in.
mm. And you're,
'Cause
I
it's like,
suppose you are, you are creating a whole new industry, and of course it's going to be chicken and egg.
yeah,
So I guess that's why I've had Camille Calabeo, aka the Galactic Gal, on the podcast, and people like that are so instrumental because they generate interest and hype around the space industry. And it's such an exciting thing to get people excited about, like gas stations in space. As we've said, it's like it's an easy concept. Um, just to switch topics a little bit in terms of your fundraising, did you find it was sort of received the same because non-technical investors can get their heads around what the mission was?
yeah. So raising money always really difficult. Times like this, I wish we had a little more competitors. Point to the point that it's actually happening. But we bring in everyone, so it's super. The competitors we did have actually switched over. Um, sharing what we're doing, it's great. It makes it really accessible to non space investors. But really, we're a little picky with our investors. We want to make sure that there's going to be more benefit to the company beyond just the money that's invested.
Mm,
It's very key, like who can open up the right doors, who has access building infrastructure companies, who has done space companies before, so who has international regulations experience, things like that.
mm. And you, correct me if I'm wrong, but well, I know I'm not wrong because it's on your website, but you're the first company to have got investments from both Lockheed Martin Ventures and Northrop Grumman.
That is
Um,
correct.
so that's massive. That's like, first of all, they are some of the biggest players, well, probably the biggest players in the industry, and it's that credibility. So do you need any more investors after that? Or, like, I mean, any new investors? Or, when you do the next stage of fundraising, do you just go back to them, um,
No,
so
no,
to
you
speak? Or,
always want to get new investors because there are investors that are at different levels. So we're Series A right now. We're talking with investors who only invest in Series B companies because we
mm,
want to start building that relationship. But with every round is a new opportunity to get some outside perspective and fresh pairs of eyes looking at the company and asking those difficult questions.
mm.
And so we like to lean in on that. Normally, we focus on the investors who can come in on this round, but we also start talking with investors who are the next round um, after what we're currently doing to really start building those relationships because they are very important.
Mm. What's your When are you doing your next stage of fundraising? Is that something we'll see in 2023? I can't believe we're in 2023 already, by the way. But
Yeah, no, yeah, I know. Our Series B will likely be 24, sometime in like 24.
Hmm. And then how, as part of that process, because I'm really interested in the sort of entrepreneurial side, um, between yourself and your business partner, Daniel, um, who sort of does the sort of finance side? Is that more him, or do you sort of do it together? 'Cause,
Yeah, so we were doing it together with Daniel taking the lead on that. I was supporting. I do a lot of like the strategics. So like Lockheed Northrop, that was 9 months of my life, working with both of them. And so we really complement each other on that side. Right now, I'm getting our marketing up. As the chief development officer, I build up the different functional areas of the business, and then I hand them off to the person we hire to then run it. So we're currently hiring for the head of marketing position, director of marketing position, um, and then once that person's hired, then I'll step back over into the fundraising side.
that's so cool. Well, you're definitely creating a hype about Orbit Fab. I was at the International Astronautical Congress, and yeah, it's just like, of course, everyone's there. As I said, people are there for lots of different reasons. But when it comes to the presentations, like yeah, Orbit Fab is definitely one of the ones people are talking about and excited to see where they're going. So kudos to you for that. Um, this year you signed the first on-orbit satellite fuel cell with Astroscale.
Yes.
I love Astroscale, a really cool company. Yeah, tell me about that. How significant was that for you?
Oh, that was so super significant. I mean, that was like the first time a company was willing to, put their foot forward and actually, um, you know, make this historic announcement with us, which was super great. And having Astroscale be that partner was wonderful. I mean, they're basically right down the road from us, uh, and we collaborate on a lot of different things. So I mean, that was like our first big demand signal. I mean, there's 1,000 kilos of xenon up in geo, and so it's really showing the commercial industry that we're going to be around. We already have partners that are leaning in. Between that and then the $13 million refueling contract for the Space Force satellites out in GEO in 2025, we're now generating. We're actually starting to bring in a lot more contracts, which will really, we're hoping, kind of makes it easier for other commercial and government programs to lean in on it.
Yeah, I think it will. Well, tell me about the UK expansion because obviously I'm very interested. Why the UK? Is that just sort of geographically because of its being at the heart of Europe, not in some senses of the words, but sort of geographically where it's located and the sort of UK's commitment to sustainability and things like that in space, or what were the motivating factors in looking at the UK?
Yeah, so there were a few. So one, we were able to hire Manny. That was a non-zero. Manny's like an all-star. We've known him for several years, so we were really excited um, to get him as on the team. The other one is, yeah, UKSA is putting in a ton of money. UK Space Agency is putting in a lot of money for active debris removal, for satellite servicing, and so we really saw that they were leaning in as a government organization behind satellite servicing. And then the third one is we don't want to we like we're a U.S. company, but we really do believe Rafty is a global interface. We don't want that to seem as just a U.S. centric thing. I mean, again, like 200 companies globally, like literally spanning the whole globe, to get requirements and make this interface, and we really wanted to kind of put our foot forward and show the international community that although we can't expand super fast globally to make sure that to be successful, we are taking the first step and we have plans for the next steps. And so we're hoping that this will help Rafty kind of proliferate even further.
Fantastic. Talking about next steps, is there anything you can announce or pre-announce? Like, what are we hoping to see? Sort of looking at next year, is there anything in particular you can mention that is
Yeah, so
newsworthy? I say.
so next year, the big things are executing on our two government contracts that we have. I mean, they're both significant contracts. The first, space phase three StratFi, and the DIU refueling services contract to refuel a government vehicle in 2025. Like, all heads are down to get those done. We also have some internal projects that we're working on. So if you want something newsworthy, like we're working on a pod racer. We call it. It's essentially like the next step of our RPOD development to make sure that we're going to be able to deliver using our shuttles.
That's so
So
cool.
that's what we're working on next year, trying to pull that together for a December launch.
Fantastic. Um, just think about when you sort of started, and you and Daniel sort of, on a piece of paper, sort of mapped out a few ideas. Did you have any inclination that it was going to be there was such a sort of gap in the market and it was such a good opportunity? And did you do much research before? Because if you had heard, for instance, that SpaceX were going to be doing their own low Earth orbit refueling, would that have sort of changed your mind? How did you know that you weren't going all in on something that could never get off the ground?
Yeah, so um, we'll start with the I'll start with the SpaceX comment and get that out of the way. So they're doing cryogenic refueling.
Mm,
And they're doing it's essentially completely different, right? Because they have to transfer a ton, literal tons of fuel to their Starship, and that's all cryogenics. And so we're not working on the cryogenics. Um, our take a very long time to refuel one of those starships through a Rafty. So
mm,
it's not like the interface is not designed for those kind of vehicles. So I think of them as different verticals, even.
got it.
It's like refueling the difference between refueling your car and refueling a cargo ship.
Yeah, and I've seen visuals of SpaceX refueling with sort of two starships back to back or docked side by
Right.
side and spinning around with a centrifugal force. Is that how they refuel the starships?
I have no idea how they're planning on doing that. I mean,
Maybe they
they
don't even know
tackled the
yet.
hard problem. We're doing the easy one. Well, easier. And then going on, how do we know this was a right fit? Well, before we started the company, I mean, we talked to seven, eight people, from startup to large established companies who were all looking at either satellite servicing or refueling at the time in the larger companies. And we asked, and we were like, is this something that you would be interested in? And after eight yeses and people saying, I'd see an additional $1 million of marginal revenue for every kilogram you could get me, and we knew we could get to space pretty cheap. There were three orders of magnitude in there of arbitrage. So we figured there's definitely a business that will fit in here somewhere.
Mm. You're also on the board of CONFORS, the Consortium for Execution of Rendezvous and Servicing Operations. The industry loves an acronym. Um,
Yeah,
tell me
just
about
conference now.
Yeah, much easier. Tell me about CONFORS, and I guess there's sort of synergies there with Orbit Fab.
Yeah, so Confers, again, a group of 60 plus international companies coming together to establish best practices and standards for satellite servicing. So, we've been a part of this since its inception in 2018, back when it was only, a couple dozen companies. Really, we felt this was important because as we're all venturing into this new field of business and space, we want to make sure we're all operating under the same norms and the same practices to make it safer, not only for the individual company, but space being so risk adverse, if one company fails, it kind of hurts the collective whole. And so having these best practices in place kind of allow us to go and fall back and say, well, we have a process, we'll and we're working on this together
Mm,
versus separately.
that's great.
And then, for us, being a refueling company, all of the services companies are our customers. So this was like the best place for us to go and constantly get feedback from all of them. Like, okay, well, how would you want your refueling interface? How much fuel do you want? And for us, it was a really good way to continue getting those touch points.
Mm. So, thinking of the sort of whole ecosystem of creating the space economy. So you've got companies providing rapid and reusable launch capabilities like SpaceX and Blue Origin, um, and companies like Orbit Fab doing the refueling and Astro scale with the space debris removal. What is missing? Like obviously a lot, but take out the businesses that will be built in space, like hotels and research labs and private accommodation. Is there anything else as part of the infrastructure that will support getting the industry into orbit, do you think, that entrepreneurs should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, like the big one is just other base infrastructure plays. So some companies are already working on in-orbit manufacturing. That's great. Kind of rethinking the way we operate. So, we NASA wants to go back to the moon. We want to have people there, right? It's important to have scientists on the moon working, but the thing that really is important is get families into space, right? Getting other people that are not in the industry into space, because the thing to remember is space is not an industry. It's a domain of doing business. Every company is a space company. They just haven't moved operations into orbit yet, right? And so however long that's going to take. But in my mind, the space industry makes it when you have a McDonald's on an Axiom space station, or there's Coca-Cola vending machine up there, right? Where other companies outside of this industry that we have are branching out into space. I think that's and then the other aspect is doing more marketing for the rest of the world, so people aren't thinking that space is like these billionaires and their toys, right? Like we currently have that stereotype now. It's like no, like everything that you have is basically brought to you by the space industry. Your food that you buy, those farmers use Earth imaging to better utilize their fields. Their equipment is driven by GPS, right? Every time you open up a bag of chips and you see that silver lining on the end there, that's from the Apollo era
Mm.
tech. So like space is integrated so deeply with all of our lives, but we don't see that. And so it's doing a better job like explaining our industry to everyone else, and in contradicting what I said, and realizing that it's not an industry, it's a domain of doing business, and inviting the rest of the world to kind of join in.
That's great. That's something I'm going to remember. That's a really, really good point of view. And I agree. I mean, I don't know about McDonald's personally, but I get what you mean. It's that kind of normalizing
Yeah,
the
it
idea
just
that anyone can work and live and visit, and there are no barriers for entry. It can be a child or someone who's retired who just wants to go for like a holiday.
right.
Um, yeah.
And I say McDonald's just because like if McDonald's is up there, it means it's profitable. Like there's an actual reason for somebody to open up a store, and there's enough people up there to like pay for the food that makes it like a micro economy. So it's like how quickly can we take what we currently have and turn it into a micro economy where people are involved? Because business to business is great, um, but that dramatic growth really comes by having people in space. And so this is where I'm like really excited with Axiom and Orbital Reef and all these other commercial space stations who are coming online.
Exactly. And I appreciate what you say about not being as US centric, 'cause I think that is how it's been for a long time. It's like, I think once the world gets excited, and space is accessible for anyone, then that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an entrepreneur myself, or I try to be. Um, what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, that are sort of excited by the idea of running their own space tech startup at some point?
Ask everybody, share your idea. Like you would be surprised with how hard it is for somebody to take your idea or even want to take your idea. I joke that like I could have a fully fresh business plan, all of the money to take it to execution, and I would still find it hard to have somebody do this, like that business, because it's not, the everyone can have the idea, but if they don't have the idea, like they're going to be a little biased to it. So just share it. Just say like, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting this business. Is this something that you would utilize? Is this something that you think would fit in the market?" And spend a month or two talking with people. I mean, we spent what 3 months on Space Fab before we said no. Before we shut it down, saying there was no business here. But we were talking with I think like 20 people at least. So, or Orbit Fab was also about 3 months, and that
Mm.
one was about 8 people and eight different companies. And then because there wasn't that many servicing companies at the time, and so just ask, talk with people, share your idea, get feedback. Um, no one's gonna take your idea. It's very hard for people to take your idea.
I agree. I think when I started off, I was very protective of any ideas I had, and I would make sure people sign NDAs and all that sort of stuff. But you do realize there is more to it, and you have to have the money. It has to be at the right time, um, and you have to be the right person to do it. Sometimes it doesn't work out.
Yeah,
So I've loved talking today. It's really inspiring, and I really do want to talk to you again and see how Orbit Fab has evolved. I do love hearing founders' predictions for their companies, and we sort of touched upon it a little bit. But where do you see Orbit Fab in the coming decades? What's your hopes and aspirations?
Well, I like to tell people we're not building a company, we're building an empire. Um, all civilizations surround themselves with a fuel source. So I hope that, in a decade, we are pushing the boundaries of humanity. So as we go further out into our solar system, it's going to be led by where we put our depots, right? And so we're going I see us putting forth the galactic highway system where you will follow our depots to your destination to get there quicker, transport goods and services. And as we keep expanding, Orbit Fab will be there putting their fuel depots and their refineries out on the frontier to keep pushing.
That's inspiring. Jeremy Schiel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.